Okay, guys, we're all set. Okay, so let's get started. We're coming. Um, it's a weird classroom. Like it's super steep. So, I guess it's going to work. So first of all, let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Emilio Calvano. I'm an economist. I do research on I'm an economist. I do research on industrial economics and competition in digital market. And as a side dish, I try to contribute as much as I can to this kind of very lively debate about antitrust and competition policy in digital market. I live and work not very far from here. I live and work at Louis University, which is in Rome, the small private university in Rome. And although I periodically spend time in the US, typically in the Bay Area and in Cambridge, in fact, I was spending a sabbatical at the Simons Institute just 3 years ago in Berkeley. And that's my email. I was, I really wanted, this is an experiment, so I didn't know how to approach it. This is a different crowd than the usual one I talk to. So at some point, I, thought about creating a subreddit so that you could choose like in real time comment. Because I guess the goal here is that, I will learn from you as much as you will learn from me in terms of, you're seeing this material through a different lens. And so you might also be able to kind of contribute whatever debate I will touch on by telling me what you think, no? But I couldn't, that's my email, just in case, feel free to shoot me an email during this talk, and I'll of course react later on or later if there is anything that you want to talk or discuss about, okay? So the reason I'm here is because I'm carrying over I have two lines of research on algorithms and markets. The first one is about pricing algorithms and markets. So the idea there is simply there are these kind of tools which are typically powered by reinforcement learning that companies use to fix the price of products and services that we purchase. This is typically online, but can be offline. So the price of gasoline at the pump in Germany and in the Netherlands is typically set by a machine. And have a line of research which is thinking about, how do those algorithms work, and in particular, can they learn to kind of increase prices, fostering what is called collusion in the law and economic literature. And then I have, of course, a second line of research on recommender systems, economic choices, and competition. I'm actually leading one of these big ESP grants, okay, which is the NSF, the equivalent in the US would be an NSF grant on this topic. So I kind of committed myself in studying the economics of recommender systems for the next 4 years, okay? So my goal here is, being here is really about learning about recommender systems in practice, thinking about cross-fertilization, working. I do work with many computer scientists at the boundary, of economics and CS. So, and of course, enjoy body, okay? All right, so, I don't know if I said it, but it's very important, that, please feel free to interrupt me and ask questions. Let's make this like a two-way conversation at times, so I don't speak for 3 hours, then and maybe get to engage in interesting discussion. This is, in terms of what to expect in the next 3 hours or so. This is untested material. These are new slides. Okay, so let's see how they work and how they work. But here is the idea. So at the beginning, I wanted to tell you why do economists care about, why do an economist should care about recommendations at all? Like, what are the kind of questions we've been grappling with? What kind of conceptual framework do we use to think about these tools? What kind of empirical research we did in terms of, assessing what is the impact of these tools, okay, on choices. I'm going to talk about, kind of diving down in issues. I'm going to talk about potential misuse and abuse of power. Okay, the power being, the power of shaping choices that you have when you deploy these tools. And I'm going to think about potential abuses and misuses. This would be at the center of the policy debate. So kind of this will connect with the last bullet point. Um, eh, we're going to talk about multi-sidedness and platforms. And then the idea is to show you um, one experiment here, which I performed with a bunch of authors by taking a very simple collaborative filter, okay, and doing an exercise which is trying to identify any potential issues with the choices and uses by schools. Next, I will talk about the effect of collaborative filters on both demand and pricing. Okay. So the reason why economists care about recommended systems is not just because they shape consumption choices, and that's important, content choices, product choices, junk movies, whatever, but they also shape incentives, economic incentives to produce, okay, those goods that eventually get recommended. So what I'm interested in is, what is, how does a world, in the old world, if you were a content producer or a manufacturer, you would have to design and produce something that would appeal to consumers, right? So in the new world in which consumption is mediated by this algorithm, then you would have to produce something that's appealing to an algorithm because, if you're not at the top of those search results, you're dead anyway. So you might as well prioritize whatever the algorithm is telling you to do as opposed to, whatever consumers like. And, whenever there is a wedge between these two things, right, then we have an issue, right, which is that maybe those incentives to produce or price or to innovate are kind of misaligned with the incentives of society. And so there's going to be one sort of experiment, which is conceptually simple, which is trying to deliver on both things, okay? Where we deploy an actual collaborative filter, we model economic agents, we look at the choices that they make, and then we look at how firms react to, this collaborative filter in terms of the price that they decide to fix for their goods and services, okay? So, that's kind of one of the main dishes of this. Is going to be, I guess, at the beginning of the next session. And then finally, I promised to say something about the policy debate. You know that in Europe, how many of you are European? Okay, that would be like about a half. So here, we kind of started regulating the digital sphere. And so I will talk about, the principles and progress made with the AI Act, the DMA, the Digital Markets Act, and the Digital Service Act. Okay. Okay, good. Right. All right. So just in terms of what examples I want you to keep in mind. Of course, I mean there are many applications, as you know better than I do. Amazon would be kind of an important example with this idea that they personalize what they show you, and they personalize this kind of search result pages, right? So when I was in Northern California for my sabbatical, if I were to search for travel guides, I would get the Northern Californian one, right? For a reason at the top of that page. And the idea here is, the algorithm here is basically mediating this marketplace, right? With those who produce books on the one hand and consumers on the other hand. And this is a very specific application because you have prices. And so you can also test the impact of recommended systems of prices. Of course, I mean, the other application without prices would be like Spotify's playlist or Netflix, right? Classic, right? Classic. But these are the things that that I would like you to keep in mind when it comes to which actual platforms are you talking about. Okay. There is just one last a few more seconds when I got into this. I remember many years ago, I think I was watching a keynote by Xavier at this conference, And one of the things that he said back then, but I'm literally talking about more than 10 years ago, 15 maybe, I don't remember really. But I remember, when he was trying to say, what is a recommended system, he would say, well, what we're doing is really we're estimating a utility function to predict, how a user will like an item based on past behavior and so on and so forth. When, I got curious if these guys, these computer scientists, they're estimating an utility function. So I've been doing that my whole life. Maybe I should look into this. What I can tell you is that no, you're not estimating a utility function, and that's kind of, um, but of course, there is lots of value in trying to predict data with this tool. So that's kind of why I got put. I think I remember that's why I got into this, trying to understand what is that these guys are doing. Okay. Now, why do we care? Those are the kind of questions I mentioned at the beginning. What is the economics of all this? Okay. So again, these tools, they shape consumption choices. They support users in various decision-making processes, what to buy, listen, and read. And so, there are this kind of very basic question, which is, are these choices better in any sense? Okay. Better for whom, by the way? Like, is the consumer gaining? Are producer gaining? Are these choices better for the intermediary? What about society? Right? If I think about social media as a recommender, what is the mechanism? Why are these tools driving our choices? Right? Is this a story about friction? Like, it's expensive for me to kind of stick to this large catalog, as anyone who's been having this kind of very painful session with their partner about what to watch tonight and winding up watching nothing. Frictions means it's just expensive, and so we're resolving those frictions, making markets more efficient. Or is this an information kind of story? But there is something that I should be knowing to make this choice, and recommender systems are informing me. And this distinction is actually important, both from a positive and from a normative perspective when we think about choices. The second, of course, I mean, another reason why we're interested is that they create value. And, this kind of looks back to this idea of frictions versus information. If it is just more convenient choices, these are nice tools, but maybe we can quantify this convenience benefit, or maybe this is because these are better informed choices in any sense. Okay, so kind of touch that later on. Another reason why economists care is because recommended systems, they redistribute the economics group. Okay, the way we design those tools are going to decide who's going to get most of the surplus which is generated in a particular marketplace. Okay, so Netflix literally gets to decide if it is consumer relative to producer relative to itself who gets, most of, the surplus that is generated, and that's important. So tweaking those algorithms is going to, allocate surplus, maybe, creating inequalities, right? And we want to understand how that happens. Okay. But it also kind of relocates surplus within the vertical chain, right? So think about a platform favoring its own content, right? So this is going to take away profits from other content producers, right? So the downstream platform is actually reshaping competition upstream between content producers, and um, um, right. And then, we also care about recommended systems and market power. Okay, this is what competition policy economists call theories of art. So here we're thinking about conduct that firms may put in place to damage consumers or competition. Okay. And so, one possibility could be thinking about degrading information to boost engagement. Okay, so I could kind of easily come up with an example where if I limit the extent of information that I would give you, you would be more engaged. Okay. Self-preferencing is another conduct which is under the lens of those regulators. and inefficient risk-taking. So we really wondered to what extent these platforms they experience. So we want to compare the private incentives to generate a more diverse playlist relative to more conservative ones. Okay, when platforms are motivated by the profit model. Okay. All right. So in terms of conceptual framework, the idea here is it should be kind of familiar to you. So the idea here is we're gonna thinking about a world in which there is a set of items, then there is a set of users. Users should choose one or more of these items, and users will have rational preferences over those items. Okay. So when I say rational preferences, I simply mean that if I take a user and I give these users two choices from the choice set, this user can always tell me whether he prefers, let's say choices are X and Y. This user can always tell me if he prefers X to Y, Y to X, or if it is indifferent between X and Y. Okay. And therefore, the idea is to think about users as having some sort of partial ordering over the set of items, simply because they are able to generate a ranking. Okay, and the idea is, of course, that their previous behavior or choice is kind of used to predict that reference ordering, and the simplest version of this prediction problem is to recommend those K items. Okay, right. So the starting point here is again. The problem here is, if I have to conceptualize what the recommender is doing, I need to understand what kind of economic function is taking. Okay. So the key ingredient is this kind of informational asymmetry, right? What economists call informational asymmetry. So there is something that the recommender system or the recommender knows that the consumer doesn't. So the idea is that the recommender has a twofold informational advantage. So first of all, it's aware of all the items which are out there. So here we're thinking about a world in which consumers do not know the catalog, but the recommender does, okay, and can kind of drive the attention towards subset of those titles. And on top of that, it can predict user item utility. Okay, so I know what's out there, and I could tell you or not. I could strategically withhold this information. I could not tell you that there is this like cool, show from Disney, right? This is literally about, telling you what I know versus not telling you what I don't know. So I have that advantage, right? You're ignorant. But I also have another advantage, which is that I know your taste is better than you do. Okay, because I know what you did in the past. I know how much you would like certain titles better than the consumer itself. Okay, that's a different kind of advantage. Economists call this experience goods. The reason why consumers don't know it's because these are special kind of goods that you only know if you like them after you try them out. But the recommender has this advantage in the sense that it can look at what say people like you like and things so on and so forth, and knows better than you do your own tastes for those items, right? So that's kind of the other advantage. In a user-centric goal, the idea is, you want to think about these recommender systems maximizing surplus. What does it mean? If I have to translate it into my own discipline, I would say maximizing surplus means using information exactly how the user itself would have used it if he had access to it. Okay, and of course, another important ingredient is users will be able to, they face asymmetric information, but they have tools to overcome it. Okay, they can always kind of gather information about what is out there, what they like, and that's going to limit the power of the recommended system, right? The more expensive it is for me to learn about what's out there, the more expensive it is for me to learn about what titles are good, the more power the recommended system will have to steer my choice, right? So, right. So again, here it's really high level, but I will kind of show you some examples. Okay. So in terms of methods, some colleagues they do this by using stylized models of the kind that we've just seen, using that conceptual framework. Some colleagues, they try to study recommended systems by, using actual algorithms. Some of these can be basically characterized as systems of equations, of different stochastic difference equations. So you might think like, or estimators if you want, right? So you may think about what are the properties of these particular estimators of ratings. Some do experiments either in the lab or synthetic, and there is, now a larger and larger set of empirical work that are trying to do quasi-experiments, okay? So quasi-experiments is what you do when you don't work with this often. Cannot run experiments, right? You try to reconstruct, you try to find the variation which is as good as if you, had done that experiment yourself. All right. So the first question perhaps is the most boring to most of you because I'm sure that must be literature, right? And for those of you, if anyone works in one of these companies, that you might just have run experiments to answer this question. But nonetheless, I'm going to show you, what has been done in my discipline answer this question. Like, are recommended systems useful at all? Are they useful, right? Do they have power to influence choice, right? I remember when I started working on this, I had some pushback to my profession, which is, yeah, of course, how you order things is important, but, at the margin. Like, people know what they want. You cannot just, give them whatever, right? Like it's a marginal thing. And so that became a question, which is, how much power does that? Can we measure it? So yes, of course, I guess we all agree power is there. The question is how much it is. That's kind of a tricky question because first of all, there is little external validity. It's going to depend on the application, right? So if you think about streaming songs, building playlists and picking songs one by one is very annoying. And the utility you get from listening, when I say utility, I really mean, how much you like. Okay, how much you like listening to a song relative to the cost you have to pay to build those playlists is kind of small. And so in that case, you would say they have a lot of power, right? If I don't keep play on a Spotify playlist, I have to build that playlist myself, which is annoying, right? I have to sift through the catalog, I have to search, right? Which is a lot of effort and listening. But if I'm buying a house, sometimes I might just create a filter. No matter how you kind of rank those houses on how you order them in front of me, I will just go throughout the, all inventory of those houses that in my neighborhood match my criteria. So I guess there is not much you can do to steer, right? Towards one house, towards the other. It depends on what is the source of friction. You need this kind of quasi-experimental variation for identification purposes. And all right, how to measure this, right? Just to be clear, like on one extreme, you can think of users as always following recommendations. That's extreme power. They always do what you tell them to do. On the other extreme, they never follow. In between, it depends. You need to measure through. Okay. So let's look at one study about Spotify by Aguiar and Walfogel. So basically, what they were trying to approach this question by looking at streams, okay, and they were exploiting the inclusion of particular songs in this kind of curated playlist, which is called. I think this is actually an algorithmic playlist that shows you the top 50 songs, okay, at the moment. Like I don't remember the name of it. And so the idea is, literally to see what the inclusion in this playlist was doing. Screen. That makes sense? Okay. So, this is kind of the motivating example that they use in this paper. So they say, let's look at this song by Kane Brown, and let's look at followers as outcomes, the number of followers and the number of streams after the inclusion on this playlist, right? And so what they did there is, just to plot those outcomes as a function of when it went in and when it went out of that place. So, you can clearly see the result. Being included in that playlist is bumping up those outcomes quite considerably, right? So basically, in this paper, they kind of redo that systematically by running regression, which they basically take the daily streams measured in millions. They regress those on songs fixed effect, on the day of the week fixed effect, and on a dummy, which kind of tells you how many periods elapsed after this latest inclusion. So this is this is the average of those coefficients after you kind of account for everything. This is days around the time that the song was included, and this is the number of streams, right? This is kind of average. This is an average treatment effect across all those songs that in the database were included, controlling for everything, and that's the kind of jump that they report, right? So identification here really requires looking at what happens before and after, what included here. So this paper, what they're doing is comparing this world, right, with this world. Okay, see. So the wedge here is just the average effect. Now, of course, this is kind of tricky because also in terms of questions, it's not obvious what you want to identify here. So if you take this study at face value, what they're identifying is the value of being in the top 50 conditional on you getting there. So these are kind of good songs, right? What streams are increasing before getting to these are like hiking up the chart, right? Songs that are selected in the sense that they're getting there. They will be getting there. And so maybe you want to identify power in different terms. You want to know how much power does Spotify, if it takes, say, a random song, a song by me, how many followers and streams can generate? That's a completely different question, right? But yeah, there is one way to tackle that question is to use, again, a clever identification technique, which is, this kind of quantifies that effect. So let me go through this real quick. So you get, because you're included in that list, you get about 18 million users more. You raise streams by 20 million. That is 25% of the average value of stream of the songs that make play, right? So if that basically means that the success of the song is literally tied to Spotify including it in that list. Okay, since you're paid in proportion to the stream, I don't know if you know Spotify business works, but they typically get a cut of all the subscriptions which are raised, revenues raised by Spotify, which is proportional to the stream. Okay, so if Sony says has 20% of all the Sony Entertainment has 20% of all the streams, they would get 20% of 70% of all revenues raised by Spotify. Kind of an oversimplification of their business model, but that's the gist. So it's kind of very important. But of course, there is this kind of selection issue. So another thing that they did to kind of overcome this selection issue was to think about, let's just take a song that barely made the list with a song that barely failed to make the list. Okay, so these are kind of two homogeneous songs. One fell like a little short of making it the list, and one just arrived a little, above the session, right? So you might think that these were two songs that had a similar level of inertia. Now, so you could kind of look at, if you buy that these are, that the only systematic difference between these kind of songs is that one made the list when the other didn't. This is as good as a random inclusion in the list. And then, what they find is that the effect is kind of still there, still very, very, very strong. Okay. So there is a boost, there is a clear boost in streams for making. Okay. Another kind of interesting piece of evidence from this guy, Reimers and Walfogger, has to do with Amazon. So they look at the books that were included in the what is it? In the category section. Okay, these are featured books. So Amazon curate the list of featured books. And so in July, this is July 2003, what they did, they recorded all those, let's call them recommendations, okay? And they were kind of looking at with these data, right? And so they collected daily sales data. They knew which books were promoted day by day. They were just looking for possible changes around the traction. Again, you see that being promoted gives like a huge good thing. The obvious answer is yes, of course. I mean, recommended systems work, okay, and you knew that already, right? That's I wanted to show you how you do this if you cannot run a experiment within the platform. All right. Now let's move on. More interesting stuff, which is potential for misuse and abuse of power. Okay. So what does it mean to misuse the condition on having this power? What does it mean misusing it or abusing it? All right. All right. So in antitrust terms, let's start with abuse. So in antitrust terms, abuse means using power with the intention to harm consumers or restrict competition. These are conduct which are intentionally meant to harm consumers or restrict competition. These to harm consumers need not be the main objective, right? It's not that you're mean in the sense that you literally want to harm consumers. This could be a side dish. Like whatever your objective is, if you are intentionally carrying over a policy or a conduct that harms consumers, among other things, or restricts competition, then that's illegal. You typically go to jail in the US, or you get a big fine in Europe, which is proportional to your whatever. Okay, so it's like a criminal offense, right? Now, what abuse? If I had to translate that in abstract terms, it really means that what companies do typically they try to find ways to make more money. Correct me if I'm wrong. How many of you work at a company and how many companies? Okay. Academia? Okay, it's kind of half and half. I guess you would agree that the ultimate goal, even though, what was it? What was that? I remember the first time I was called by an antitrust authority to talk about, one of the big tech, one of the GAFA. I don't know if you figure out which one it is. One of the slides I had is if in your IPO, you have an entire section. IPO is when you go to the stock exchange, okay? And you raise capital there. Initial public offering, you have an entire section of your filing that says, we will not be evil. Then you should be concerned that at the very least, they know they have the power to be, okay? So, I mean, even though they promise, some companies, they promise to care about consumers, I mean, maximize profit. Right? In the short run or in the long run, eventually they're doing which what they should be doing, which is to maximize profit. And the point is that some of those conducts that generate profit, they might harm consumers. Okay, and so harming consumers is illegal. Okay, in a sense that in some jurisdictions, consumer surplus is the standard. But in most jurisdictions, the illegal thing is not to use your power to maximize profit. What's illegal is typically to put conducts in place that are meant to preserve your power or to diminish the power of your rival, to restrict competition. Okay, that's considered entrapment and things like that. But in any case, if you want to understand here, you need to kind of try to think about whether maximizing profit in this particular business means not maximizing consumer surplus. Now, why is that the case? Why is that the case? Well, for the kind of applications that we have in mind, some of these companies, they get kickbacks, right? Commission if they push some products as opposed to the others. Sometimes they minimize costs, right? So Amazon, has different wholesale costs for shipping similar items, right? Spotify, might have, that might find that some content is cheaper to stream than some others. Netflix has different contracts with the mayor, so it could be that indeed streaming something is more expensive. And when is that the case, then of course, you have this kind of monetary vivid incentive not to give consumers what they necessarily what they want. Okay. Of course, some of these companies, they also produce their own content and products. Okay. Think about Amazon branded products. Think about Netflix TV series. I don't know if Spotify produces good music. Um, I wouldn't be surprised if a part of the catalog was commissioned, okay, for some reason. And so there, of course, I mean, they, have an extra incentive to promote their own goods, right? And so that means that this is what is called self-preferencing in the policy debate. Have you ever heard this word, self-preferencing? No? In the policy debate, and in the law now, that's called self-preferencing. So the fact that, Netflix, a big Netflix series at the top of my screen, it's called self-preferencing. Okay. Now, of course, the reason why they do that is because they're trying to maximize engagement. So to some extent, there is nothing wrong with that. I'll get back to that in a second. So another issue is what is called misuse. So we talked about abuse, abusive conduct. Now I'm moving into the misuse territory. So what misuse means, it's like you're using power in an inappropriate or an incorrect way. Okay. So maybe you would disagree with me, but when I think about recommender systems, I think of them as very powerful, but at the same time very blunt tools. Something so complex such as estimating traffic, right? And suppose that these are blunt tools because they have to work at scale. Okay, so they have to work in very complex environments. They have to personalize the page of millions of users. In some settings, content keeps changing. So it's very hard to keep track of preferences when content is changing. Right? So you need something which is not too sophisticated to be able to do that. Now, but sometimes, you might think that these blunt tools may be biased in some sense, precisely because they're not meant to be overly sophisticated, but work. They could be, so we've been talking about issues with the algorithm, okay, or issue with the data, right, that could cause bias. That's not intentional at all, but that's very important, okay? So that would be a misuse. So, this kind of feedback loop, these are things we've been talking about, this feedback loop, recommendations, choices, data. If you recommend something, then you induce some choices. Those choices are generating some data that you then use to make recommendations, right? So this kind of loops might be one reason for why you get suboptimal outcomes. This kind of loop might be one reason why something gets viral and something does not. This kind of loop might be one reason for why I'm a Democratic voter in the US. I get exposed to way too much Democratic content and vice versa, right? So this might be a threat for democracy and so on and so on. Rich get richer effect, rabbit holes, all these phenomena are, we can categorize them as misuse. Okay. No, even though these are important, it's important to understand if specific recommender systems can cause misuse. Okay. Both for society at large, right? We want to know if information is flowing in our society, or for markets. Okay. Think about, and this would be the object of the experiment. Think about, I'm an Amazon seller. I have a product, and this product is not selling, not because the product is not good, just because for some unfair reason, there is some other product of another manufacturer which is overly recommended. And in antitrust circles, we hear these complaints a lot. I mean, it's not that my product is not good, it's that my product is not chosen by the algorithm to be the lucky one that gets to the top of those search results pages. And there's nothing I can do about it. The only thing that I can do is to produce good products. Now, if you have an algorithm that always picks the same manufacturer in a particular category, that's going to create market power. That's going to induce rivals to go bankrupt the next. That's going then to induce that manufacturer to raise prices and so on and so forth. Okay. So this misuse can be, potential misuses can be potentially one reason for why we pay much more than what we should for our goods. Okay. Right. It's less sexy than thinking about this is why Trump is going to win the election, but it's equally, well, not equally important, but important. Okay, that's the way I think about it. All right. Now, of course, if you misuse and abuse, they call for different approaches. Typically, abuse, you need theory and empirical studies to approach those. Whereas with misuse, I think it's more interesting because you need to test the actual algorithm and run those field experiments. Okay. Right. Okay. Goals, objectives, rather. What is the objective of a recommended system? With the simplest world in which the objective of the recommended system is consumer centric. Okay. So the idea is, consumer ranking is personalized. If you take any textbook, you get all these criteria that for recommenders to satisfy, right? I have to admit, the first time I saw these relevant novelties, serendipity directly, I kind of had a hard time parting those out because at least for me, the idea is again, I choose, I know there is a ranking which maximizes consumer welfare or surplus or utility or well-being, okay? And then the idea is I want, forget about this, I just want a recommender system that kind of chooses that ranking, right? So in theory, it's very simple, but in practice, it's more complicated because the idea is, maximizing engagement. It's kind of, it could be tricky in cases where you have like addiction issues, things like that. So short term, long term. So even, in the simplest case in which you might think this recommender is designed, it's benevolent in the sense that it's designed to please consumers. To be honest, it's not even clear what that means. So that's kind of one of the issues that we have when we study it. But it gets more complicated because then there are producers out there. Typically, these are other agents. Okay, it's a different group of agents. These algorithms, they're often designed by platforms, and these platforms, they work to the extent that they have these multiple sites on board, right? And so, and on top of that, the business model of this platform can potentially be one in which they monetize to consumers or one in which they monetize to users, right? So, and so, they can potentially raise revenues from people's side. So think about it, just to kind of tell you how subtle this is, and how difficult it is then to bring this to the data or to bring this to an experiment. Think about Amazon. So you have like buyers and sellers, and can you answer this question? Like, I know, at least in theory, that there is there is one consumer who's looking for whatever Northern California travel guide, right? Yeah, the family of kids, so I might go for the more friendly, more sort of family-friendly guides. If you're a foodie, you would have a different best guide for you and so on and so forth. So, Amazon knows a little bit who I am, and then it's going to be easy to personalize those search results, right, for the user. But then I was thinking, what is the producer optimal ranking of items? Like, let's put ourselves on the shoes of the producer. right? Is there like an equivalent thing, like the optimal ranking for them? Clearly, how much money they make is going to depend on how you rank them, right? But what's an optimal ranking for them? Okay. Not clear. If anything, sorry, you wanted to say something? Correct. Exactly. So exactly. So what is optimal? You want more or less diversity in those rankings. Yeah, there's in the short term, maybe you want to squeeze as much money as possible from those suppliers, but then you know that this is a repeated interaction, so they will have to come back, right? So think about Spotify. Do I go for the majors? Do I go for the indies? There are a combination of both. What's best for me? It's kind of complicated in theory and in practice, right? And how do you measure it? Churn, it's complicated. So I guess the point here is that it's complicated. It's not even clear in theory what we're doing on this side of the market. One option, if you want, not saying that's the right one, but at least it's something that we can visualize is, thinking about ranking products or content, maximizing, suppose that this is Amazon, so that there is a price for those objects. You might want to maximize price times the probability of selling, right? So the best products are the ones that sell best conditional on price, right? So if you know how much a product sells at each and every round, right, conditional on price, if those prices are fixed, then you can put, at the very top, the one that generates most revenues and so on and so forth. That's kind of something that you want to do if you are, what's your name? Georgina, if like Georgina said, if you're short-sighted and you're trying to maximize commission, at least we found like something that's clearly defined and that we could do and that we could measure. But it's complicated, okay? But if that's not enough, there is a third actor in that, provided they're just two sides. But there are platforms where you have multiple sites, but even if there are just two sites, you still have to think about the platform as a producer, right? Of course, they're going to have their own titles or blended products. That's going to give them an incentive to self-promote, self-referencing. There is evidence that this is, I guess, we don't need that. We see this on a daily basis, that, those platforms are kind of self-promoting their own products. That's illegal. That's literally illegal. It's written in the law. At least, at the very least, it's explicitly illegal for the six designated gatekeepers in Europe. But then the question is, okay, so self-referencing is illegal, but what the heck is, what is it? How do you define it? Because it's complicated. Sometimes, if Netflix shows are good, then there's nothing wrong about putting them at the top of those search results page, right? So you need to kind of think what is you need to have a conceptual framework that tells you what is the definition of self-preferencing. And once you have that, how do I measure it? How can I detect whether that thing is actually happening or not? If you can detect it, maybe you also want to measure the welfare cost. I mean, self-preferencing can be as a minority in a world in which, we all know, for instance, that Netflix, even though it's at the top of the search results, not that good, so we keep passing. Not a big deal, right? So you still want to measure what is the web cost of that. Okay. Um, um, Now we could do two things. We could think about measuring self-preferencing with data, or we could do the experiment that I was talking about. Maybe we should do both, but I'm going to skip the order. If you allow me to skip part B, then I will go back to this in the second part of the afternoon. So I'll show you something more tangible. Otherwise, we're always So this is kind of what work that is trying to identify misuse, okay? Not abuse. Um, so that um, it, we've been carrying over now for quite some time with a bunch of footage. So let me tell you what we do with this, okay? Um, so think about a world, very simple world, in which you have a number of consumers, a number of differentiated products, and think about those products as being like the only product that these firms are selling. So you have high consumers, J firms, each one selling one product or a price that they get. Consumers do not know how much they like those goods and what the price of those are. Okay, but they have access to this kind of search technology, right? They can engage in what we call costly sequential search process. Okay, so this is how economists conceptualize consumers searching for goods. Okay, so there's going to be a stochastic process that determines what is the order in which you sample goods. Then you sample those goods, you look at them, you look at their properties, you decide if they're good enough, and then if they are, you consume them, you buy them and you consume them, or you skip past them and you keep searching. Okay, that's kind of the process very fine. So this is kind of what they can always do. Then there is a recommender system, which is going to estimate utility and is going to directly search. So the idea is literally to think about a recommended system that's going to provide these consumers with some option. Okay. And we're going to assume at the beginning that the recommended system is benevolent. So it's always kind of based on the estimate of the utility that consumer I attaches to product J is going to recommend to each and every consumer what he thinks is best for him or her. Now, because I'm going to define this notion of the algorithmic demand, I'm literally going to show you how the demand for one product changes in a world in which I switch on and off those recommendations. Okay, literally the anatomy of the demand function. And the anatomy of the demand function, which is the relationship between price and quantity, it's very important because it's what shapes the market outcome. It's what shapes the strategic interaction. Okay, it's what gives the firms, for instance, incentives to compete and come price. Okay, so I guess the kind of goal is to get there and show you how these two things look like. So the question we're after here, given the kind of economists we are, is, are recommended systems pro or anti-competitive? So we're going to approach this in three ways. Are recommendations biased in a systematic way? If yes, do they increase or decrease concentration? And how do firms respond? So we want to look at incentives here, given that's like, okay. So how do we do this? This is like a numerical exercise or a Monte Carlo, or whatever you want to call it. We call it, an experiment in synthetic and controlled environment. So the idea here is I'm going to design users. Okay, me, the researcher, the econometrician, is going to design users. Okay? I'm going to design a bunch of synthetic users, and I'm going to give them preferences over these items. Okay? How am I going to design those preferences? I'm going to use economic theory. Okay? I'm going to use like standard workforce economic models of preferences to endow each and every user with preferences over those items. Okay. Then the second thing I will do, I'm going to build a sparse data set of those preferences. Okay. Since I know exactly what those preferences are, now I can build a data set based on those true preferences, right? And God, I know exactly what everybody likes. Now I can build a data set that then I use to train a standard collaborative filter. Okay. Right. So, and then I'm going to play with this. I'm going to, because the nice thing about this exercise is that now I can control the quality of the data. Okay. And I can see how those recommendations change as I change the quality of the data that I'm that I'm using for training them. Then I'm going to train a simple collaborative filter, and then I'm going to analyze market outcomes with and without these recommendations. So this kind of requires a model of choice, right? So I'm going to put myself in the shoes of each and every consumer, each and every user, and I'm going to make choices assisted in one universe when these users are assisted by a recommender system, and in another universe when these users are not. And then I'm going to compare these two universes, right? That's the idea. Right, and the benchmark again is that search model I was talking about. Okay. Now, the contribution here is really the approach. What I'm saying is, if you are an antitrust authority, okay, and you want to make sure that this particular collaborative filtering is not biased in any sense, this would be more precise. One thing that you could do, one thing that actually the European Commission could do, is to ask the company to hand the specifics of the algorithm, and it could like do a similar exercise. Okay, and then the claim, like the bold claim of this work is, we're going to have perfect identification, right? If I see that recommendations are very different than what should be recommended according to their true preferences, then we have a problem. So that's the good news. The bad news is that this is going to happen in a synthetic environment, right? So this kind of suffers of obvious external validity, right? So how's this model representative of actual preferences? How's this kind of algorithm representative of anything that's been done, particular domains of application? Yeah. Can you speak up, please? Sure. I'm gonna show it to you. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yes, thanks. That's an excellent question. So I'm pointing to when you build a data set, right? I told you can play with the quality of the data, right? So one thing that you could do, you can give this collaborative filter high quality data, what sometimes I call exogenous data, which is literally a sample of true preference. I know what true preferences are. I'm going to build a data set which is like a sample of true preferences. Okay, that's as good as it gets, I would say. You get a sparse matrix of true rate, right? Maybe perturbed ratings, right? But in my view, that's as good as it gets. You never get that good because you're going to learn a lot from that data set. Another thing that you could do is to sample from the data. Okay, so one of the arguments that you hear around when they talk about this feedback loop hypothesis is, we only get to see what people like, right? So this kind of ratings are always skewed. No, we don't. Think about the cold start problem, or no, the cold start problem is at the product level. But think about a user that has never tried something in a different category. That's going to, and things like that. So we're gonna have a stochastic process that we use to build that rating matrix that goes like this. In one of the treatments in the experiment, we would say, we start with no data, we make recommendations, we look at choices, then we ask users, what was your rating? Then we retrain, we make recommendations, we look at choices, we ask the users, the synthetic users, right? Not really asking, but just using the experience utility as the rating that goes into the data set, and so on and so forth. Okay, that kind of amounts to sampling from the data. Because these users, precisely because the recommender system, they point them towards stuff they like, is going to is going to make the data set being biased in one particular direction. Okay, so all right. Just so you know, going forward, so that you know what to look for. First of all, I'm going to show you that recommendations will be concentrated. What does that mean? That these users will be consuming, will have a more homogeneous consumption pattern than they should. We're going to create some champions out of thin air, which is a problem. I'm going to try to argue that's not data, but it's a feedback loop issue. I'm going to show you that they change the anatomy of the mind, that because of this collaborative, when you use these collaborative filters, prices go up, and then going to try to draw a relationship between information quality and consumer. Okay, right. Let me skip this. Okay, so this is just, I know you're very familiar with this, just to keep you aware of what we do. So there's going to be a rating matrix. We're going to do matrix factorization, right? So the idea is there is a rating matrix, right? We're going to populate these rating matrix with a subset of those ratings, and then we're going to try to make predictions about those ratings. So we're going to be using in this paper the latent factor model, okay? And the idea here, this is very interesting. It's a really interesting object because even though in the CS world, this is thought to be an theoretic recommended system. So you're just trying to factorize a matrix. There is no theory. But indeed, what you're doing, you're adding a lot of structure into preferences, right? So you're saying that these ratings, they additively combine a bunch of latent factors, right? And preferences of users over those latent factors. And there is an equivalent class of economic model that estimates preferences using models exactly like that. Okay, so it was very interesting to me. So we're going to estimate those factors by doing the usual thing, minimizing some quadratic loss function, non-observed rating, and then we're going to make the recommendations. Again, these recommendations will be benevolent. So once I estimate those factors, I'm going to compute the predicted rating. I'm going to recommend to every consumer the best items according to their predicted rating. Okay. Right. All right. So let me give you. So that's the economic part. So that was like the simple latent factor collaborative feature, right? Now I told you, so that's what I'm going to use to estimate preference. But now I have to generate preference. Okay. I have to generate those users. I have to endow them with some preferences. Okay. How do I do that? Well, we use the exact same model, which means we're going to assume that true ratings are the additive combination of a bunch of. Okay. This is called, in economics, that's called a flexible model of the address variety. And it kind of mirrors the structure of the algorithm, right? So the idea here is that any bias that comes out of this is not because of model misspecification. So in a way, with this exercise, we're putting the collaborative filter in the best possible world, in which it's using a model specification, which is exactly identical to the actual structure of preferences. But you can think of relaxing it, right? And then, of course, I have to handpick these parameters. I have to handpick, by hand, what is the proclivity of user I towards attribute H, and what is the measure of attribute H in product A. How do you do this? Well, you do this in an educated fashion. So we use a model which is called the pure horizontal differentiation type. Okay. This is I pick those parameters in a way that we all disagree on what is the best item. That's called pure horizontal differentiation. Okay. That's a case in which preferences are purely idiosyncratic. There is no quality function. We would all disagree on what the best item is. Okay. One way of thinking about this, if you're thinking about rankings, you would say that in the population, everyone draws a random ranking. Okay, just to give you the gist of it. That's what we do here. But you also want to test how this filter does in a world in which instead we do agree that there is a vertical dimension. So I guess we all like, more quality to lower quality, right? Other things are constant. We all like to pay less and more, other things and constant, right? So you could have a world in which the opposite world is with a world in which we all agree on, what the best product is. Does that make sense? Okay. So those are kind of two different models. And we're going to test the performance of the filter in these two different worlds. And we also want to do another thing. We want to distinguish between mass and niche products, because in the debate there is this idea that some products are overly recommended because they have more people that like those products. These are called the mass products. In jargon, they say they have a larger potential demand as opposed to niche products, which, if you like them, you love them, but, these are niche, these are in demand. We want to have some products which have also this advantage, that have a larger potential demand. We're kind of designing preferences in a way that we cannot capture these key distinctions, right? This is all, a thought experiment. But I think it still can mean, when we started doing this, we were really curious to see if they work. Yeah. And if they don't, why they don't. Right? So that's the main thing. Again, perfect identification in a synthetic environment. All right. So one way of thinking about this, for the simplest case in which you have two factors, is literally you're placing users in a two-dimensional space and products in the same two-dimensional space. And preferences are proportional to the distance that users have to those products, right? So, that model, one simple way of interpreting it, I will be a point in that space. My favorite product would be the closest product, and the second favorite, the second closest product, and so on and so forth. So if you like that kind of geometrical interpretation, so one way of visualizing this is to think, of all products as being, when you have two factors, a product is two numbers, right? What is the characteristic one and what is the characteristic two? And a user is two numbers, what is my taste towards characteristic one, what is my taste towards characteristic two? So you can think of users being sprinkled along this portion of the unit circle, and items being sprinkled along this portion of the unit circle, right? And each user here likes the item that's sitting close to. Okay? That's super kind of simple, right? Geometric intuition. Right. So here, this is the case with perfect horizontal differentiation, in the sense that, what I like depends on where I am, right? And again, all these, if you have the same number of items and users, everyone would kind of prefer the food that is sitting, right below him or her. And this would be different for everybody else. Okay. So as simple as that, right? That's the geometrical intuition, that's the formula. But and of course, I mean, right, for these guy here, think about this guy here. These are the so-called indifference curves. So these, are all the products that would keep this utility, the utility of this guy indifferent. And on top of that, is going to grow in the northeast. The northeast are kind of, because these parameters are positive, are preferred by everybody else. Okay. So being northeast gives products an advantage. Of course, on the circle, there is no product which is more northeast than any other product, but we'll reduce that. Okay. On the other hand, when I say we're gonna, another important point is, now let's think about the item that's sitting on the 45-degree line. That's what we call the mass product, as opposed to the item which is sitting on the axis. Right? The potential demand of this product here is this guy here, the neighborhood. Clearly, this guy has twice as much demand as this guy. Does that make sense? So, right. In the opposite case, when we look at vertical differentiation, the idea is that, as I told you, products which are not T give a higher utility by design, there's going to be a product which is clearly not different from all the other products. So all these users, by design, we handpicked these parameters so that all these users would prefer this guy here on the 45. And of course, you can do anything in between. Let me skip that. Right. So of course, we're going to thousands of items, okay, and users, right? And the idea now is to think about a particular market, right? So we're going to select 19 of those items. We're going to put them in the same market. What does it mean? It means that all the users will have to pick one out of those 19 products. Okay, we're just going to use the rest of the items to estimate those preferences, right? So this is kind of trying to capture the intuition that, we're still going to be able here to use the correlation between those tastes to estimate preferences for those 19 products by using other. Okay. Okay, so this is the data generation thing. We kind of try to match when they say we're going to build those data sets. Now, because of that model, I know the true rating matrix. I literally know the true rating. Makes sense? Sometimes I wonder if there is a vocabulary. Okay. I know the true rating matrix. How am I going to construct the rating matrix that I use to train? We're going to basically replicate the key features of the standard data set in the literature, right? The most famous one, for instance, being the Netflix challenge. Of course, I mean, when you're trying to, one way of thinking about the exercise, you can think of this collaborative filter as being an estimator of the true rating matrix, right? And so, of course, the properties of this estimator are going to depend on how hard it is the thing that they're trying to estimate. That depends on how much data you gave them, and things like, what is the ratio of observations parameters, and so on and so forth, right? So we have many degrees of freedom here on how to perform this exercise. We just try to replicate the features of the Netflix challenge dataset, and assuming that, because that was a similar exercise, those datasets were crafted in a way that, made this problem similar in terms of hardness to the actual problem. We ran a bunch of these exercises and we average across those exercises. We do this in various ways, but I already gave you, the list of exogenous versus endogenous, right? All right, so let's forget about prices at the moment. Suppose this is Netflix, okay? So there are no prices, right? So again, once I train those recommenders, I offer recommendations. They look at what consumers do, and consumers are welcome to discard the recommendation and do something else. So they will kind of follow that recommendation. They think that the value going forward of searching for something better is going up. So this is kind of a fully consistent model, or a partial equilibrium model of consumer behavior. So let's see what we find, and then we can get coffee. Right. So first of all, we can quantify. We can literally quantify how much more surplus these consumers get because they're assisted by recommendation. And of course, surprise, surprise, recommended systems work. Okay, in the sense that we measure that their surplus goes up from 1.5% to 6%, and depending on the model we try, because we switch those recommendations on. Okay, so they work. Like they're directing the attention of those users towards the right product. So you get better choices and lower search costs. So consumers choose better and search less. That means higher food. Okay, and we measure that. Yes. Right. So that's I guess that's exactly why it is larger, because the point is because it's because when everybody agrees on what the best products are with the same amount of data, you're kind of doing a better job for everyone, and so that kind of compounds. Your recommendations are better across the board. This is a kind of a much harder problem to crack, which means that on average you're doing good, right? But not as good as you would do in a world in which you get this kind of stronger signal from the data. Because one way of thinking about it is here you get a strong signal from the data, and so you're making much more informed recommendations as opposed to here when you kind of fix the properties of the data. Yeah. Thanks for that question. So, okay. So this is where we look at concentration of those choices. Okay. So remember that there are 19 products. Okay. And I'm recommending one of these 19 to all consumers, right? And then I record their choices, right? And I compute the market share in all of these experiments, right? And then I average the market share of the largest firm, the second largest firm, the third largest firm in all, right, these experiments, right? So in a world with no recommender system, you have 19 products. In the case in which you have horizontal differentiation, what's the market share that is expected? And we all disagree. There are 19 products. You would expect each firm to have a little bit more than 5%, right? Right? There is no product which is better than the other. There is no recommended system. Consumers are searching at random, right? It makes sense to think that, every firm will have this kind of serve of 5% of consumers, right? With their basic, right? Their demand. Does that make sense? So you wouldn't expect any firm to have a larger market. Yes. That question? No. Now I switch on, now I look at the world in which I switch on those recommendations, right? And all of a sudden I get the following. I get that the largest firm here has 3 times the market share that it used to have when there were no recommendations, right? On the other hand, the smallest firm has like a fifth or a sixth of that market share. So what this means is that when I switch that collaborative filter on, I get winners and losers. Okay? For some reason, this algorithm is overly recommended some firm at the expense of some other. That makes sense. And let me add that the identity of this firm is literally random. Okay, yeah, I should have a slide about that. This is the identity of the champion of the largest firm. Okay, it's typically towards the center, the sense that it tends to be one of those firms which has a larger potential demand. Okay. But still, from if you think about this market, you would see, these guys here are exactly those guys that say, hey, my product is good. It's just that Amazon keeps showing this product, not my product. So we get a version of that playing exactly, right? And so the question that we had at this point was that, why is that? What is going on? Can we kind of look at those estimates, try and identify what is the source of this bias? So first of all, sorry, let me tell you that when we do this exercise, so this exercise here is with exogenous data. So what I told you is high quality data, right? So it's literally a random sample of true rating. So if that happens, it's clearly not because of some data issue, right? Or to make sure that that's not the case, we kind of rerun this exercise by sampling from the day, right? So we build those data sets that I talked to you about, and then we find basically, that sampling from the day it kind of exacerbates the problem, but it's not of a second order, of a different order of magnitude. Okay. So the next thing that we do, look, like we didn't know how, from this point on, knowing what the collaborative filter is, what do you do? How do you try and make progress thinking about what is it about these matrix factorization technique, which is kind of overly estimating in a systematic fashion the rating of some companies at the expense of some others, right? And this is one of the creative ways where we try to make progress. Particular example that I showed you, one nice thing that I can do, because I know true parameters, I can plot the estimated preferences against the actual preference, okay? So these are estimated coefficients, if you want, estimated vectors against the actual one, right? So what is going on here? So the red line is the true location of consumers and products. The yellow lines, of course, there are more consumers than products, right? This kind of yellow cloud is the distribution of consumers. These are the synthetic users. The synthetic users that have those predicted ratings, and the blue dots are the synthetic items. Okay, the estimated characteristics of those products, so the synthetic products. So as you can see, I mean, of course, we can systematize this kind of part. But as you can see, synthetic users are more homogeneous than actual users. Okay, these clouds and pushed a little bit, more towards the center. And synthetic products, estimated products, they kind of go in and out of this frontier. Right? So basically, what we show is that the best intuition I can give you about what's going on is because this collaborative filter, they do a lot of averaging across observed ratings, they tend to predict ratings which are more homogeneous than they actually are, which means that they compress tastes. But when you compress tastes in a world in which you have some firms which are more popular than others, you tend to, over-recommend those mass products at the expense of others. Right? So, here I'm just waving my hand, trying to kind of code this for you. But the idea here is to use this exercise to distinguish between three hypotheses of what's possibly going on. Is it because the machine is failing to identify tastes? Is it because the machine is failing to identify product characteristics? Or is it because the machine is failing to identify the extent of quality, which is again, how much notice this kind of true product does? Okay, so it's a taste, type, or quality kind of issue. And we find that it's kind of a combination of these three things. But this homogenization effect is particularly interesting. Okay, so it's coffee time. I'll see you in 30 minutes, right? Okay. Thank you. All right. So let's um, so let's kind of resume from where we left off. So yeah, the idea was to kind of test these alternative hypotheses on what is possibly go wrong by using these exercises. And that's one way of doing it. And I guess the punchline here is that this kind of exercises are insightful. So we're kind of have this agenda where I'm trying to push policymakers, algorithmic office of the European Commission and the next office in charge of implementing think seriously about doing this kind of exercise, right? We're actually testing algorithms in test bed or synthetic environment. Right? So let's look now at the second part of this exercise, which is really thinking about now incentives, right? So the idea here is we're going to think about firms and those producers of those 90 products that kind of they have perfect foresight in the sense that they anticipate what their choices will do to their ranking, okay? And they will adjust their choices accordingly, right? So we're going to think about the simplest of all possible choices that firms make, which is at what price shall I sell? Shall I sell my goods? What price shall I sell my goods? And so we're going to be looking at how those prices change as we switch on and off those recommendations. Okay? And of course, we're going to again contrast the prices that arise, no recommendations, right? With the prices that arise with recommendations. And let me kind of jump to this one. So again, so these are those 19 firms, right? And all those 19 firms, they're choosing their prices, best reacting both to the algorithm design and what the other sellers are doing. Okay? So the way of thinking about this is that each firm is choosing the price that maximizes the profit, conditional on what everybody else is doing. Okay, so nobody can really make more money by changing unilateral choice. So we're looking at an equilibrium, okay, of these strategic gains in which firms are choosing price. Okay. So those are kind of those 19 products. And these are the prices that arise when there are no recommendations, and these are the prices that arise when there is a recommended system, right? So as you can see, like an obvious finding is that prices go up. And so the impact of those recommendations is that prices go up. The average price goes up by 25%. It's one way of interpreting this result. If you think about the level of prices and measuring the extent of competition in this marketplace, this is saying is that the recommendations are reducing competition, are diminishing competition. Okay, so kind of a negative result if you want, with a negative balance. Okay, so what is driving this? Right, so that's the next question. And so to answer this question, one way of kind of visualizing what is going on is to literally look at demand. Okay, how that changes when I switch the recommended system on. Okay, so demand is just a relationship between price, the y-axis, and quantity on the x-axis, right? So here, what you're reading is how much these firms expect to sell for each and every possible level of price, right? When the price is really low, they sell nothing, right? When the price falls, they virtually sell to everyone, like in the benchmark. That makes sense. World with no recommendations, that would be the demand. Now let's see how that changes when I recommend it. So first of all, this kind of demand shifts up. This means that recommended systems are great because they increase the willingness to pay of everybody. Right? So the idea is that now, because consumers are directed towards the product that they like the most. Okay, firms perceive demand as being strong. And now, those users that are directed to them, they have a higher willingness to pay, as opposed to the kind of random number of users that they were getting in the world. Okay, again, here it's literally, consumers are searching at random, right? If instead they are directed towards the product they like the most, then the firms perceive demand as being stronger. All of a sudden, all of those customers that land on their product page, they're customers who like the product. Therefore, they're willing to pay more. That makes sense. This is called a vertical demand function. For each price, quantity, for each and every possible price, quantity goes down. Demand is strong. Demand is also flatter. Okay, what this means is that demand is less heterogeneous. So in the old world, okay, where I get a random sample, of people who like and don't like, right, my product. I get more diverse set of consumers in the world. Those who are directed towards me, are those who are very similar tastes, particular like language. That means that demand shifts rotates. It's a rectangular demand also bend, okay? So this kind of portion here disappears. What does that mean? In the old world, if I lowered my price enough, I would also attract the consumer that, are far away references for my product. Maybe they would say, hey, this product is far away from my, location. But because it's so cheap, I will compromise. And so you could, in principle, pay consumers, right, to buy your product, the old world. This means, again, if you lowered your price, you would be able to catch them, right? Because we all have our favorite product, but, when we shop, sometimes we compromise. We buy products that we like less just because they're cheaper, right? If you take that argument to an extreme, this compromise means that in principle, these firms, they could attract also consumers very far away from them. In the new world, the recommended system is kind of diverting the attention of those users towards products that they like more, which means that these users far away from me are much less likely to bump into my product, right? So even though I lower my price, the reason why they don't buy it is because they just don't bump into my product. Okay? So this kind of demand vanishes here. Okay. And the last shift is called the horizontal shift happens for mass products. So those products which are closer to the center, because of that homogenization, they just get a higher volume. And so the vertical shift was higher willingness to pay with dollar volume. Here it's like higher volume. That's for the product. And I guess the punchline here is that these two worlds are very different. This is the same verb in the same product. Okay? Nonetheless, the demand that is facing the world that is recommended system is very different than the demand that is facing something else. And that means that prices are very different. But on top of that, any strategic choice that firms will make will cater to this demand and not to this demand. Right? Which basically means that the way you design those tools is going to affect what firms produce and what they plan in some people. So that's kind of one illustration of that impact. We don't think very much. I mean, at least my understanding is that in this community, but please correct me if I'm wrong, don't really think hard about, if I tweak my algorithm, and then we get different products, different content. Maybe not. But that's kind of obvious, right? In a way. Okay. So another thing that you could do, thinking about, on balance, I told you that prices are higher, but on the other hand, choices are better. Right? Firms are directed towards their favorite product, so they make better choices. All in all, you can think about quantifying which of these effective sides, and these sides almost balance each other, but on average, the effect is positive in the sense that despite the higher price, the recommended system managed. All right. One last point I want to, I don't know what I think it's a little bit stupid, but you don't know that it's let me speak now. Let me go back to it. Right, so I'm not sure. I'll tell you this. Is there any questions about the exercise? Okay, so we discussed about these two features of most of the markets that we've been talking about, which is on the one hand the idea that there are multiple types, okay, so users, producers, and the platform itself. And because there are multiple types, there is also this kind of interesting about the preference. So this is based on ongoing research by colleagues in the US, which is trying to which is trying to provide a conceptual framework to think about self-preference, right? Remember where we were is like, what the heck is self-preferencing? It's totally okay. Netflix advertises its own shows to the extent that they're good, right? So now we should define self-preferencing as kind of going beyond of the simple observation that, you have a platform which is being its own product becomes dominant, right? How do we do that? How do we detect it, and what is the welfare cost? So these are the kind of questions we're asking today. So let's start with kind of a generic illustration of some certain experience. And so here is the idea. Here's the thing. So let's think about users choosing among a product, a ranked product. Okay. Again, the platform is going to choose the rank, serve some of the activity, depending on the consumer sellers of the step. So here is one definition. I like a definition that we can operationalize, which is we say that there is self-preferencing if the platform ranks its own product higher than it would maximize some seller experience. And now I'm kind of moving the thought and saying, okay, so then what does it mean to maximize something? Let's get them step by step. Okay. So, okay, two parts. So there is a demand part of those rankings and a supply part. On the demand side, consumers are going to choose among these ranked products. And of course, if you rank them better, you're going to get more purchases. Okay? So the idea is that better ranking leads to more conversion. Okay? That's the demand side. The supply side is that this platform, as we discussed, puts among a very large number of transport. And of course, because it's a platform, it's trying to bring the balance interest of consumers and sellers at the versus its own at the expense. Okay. Right. So without self-preferencing, which of course, I mean, one possibility here is if you have a finite, let's make it happen, okay? If you have a finite number of ranks, this particular regime, okay, hotels in Bali, I was doing it here. You have a finite number of ranks, right? In principle, you can kind of try them all out, okay? And you can measure how much throughput would hotels get and Emilio gets for each and every possible combination. Because you have finitely many of those, you can trace a frontier. No? There's going to be some of these rankings will be the frontier. What does it mean? It means that there is no ranking that would increase simultaneously how much the hotels make and how happy Emilio is. That's kind of the frontier I have in mind when we're going to work. And the idea here is that these platforms, they're trying to balance the interest of these two groups. The booking wants hoteliers on board, right? So I want to keep those right? And maybe right wants to keep the business, right? And at the same time, he wants to be able to deal to Emilio, and he's trying to balance those interests, and he's going to pick something. But I guess the first claim is that it makes sense to pick something else. If you have a ranking that does better on both dimensions, this is continua nothing called. Okay. Out of the full screen mode, maybe it will pop out. Fine. Okay. So this is the demand side. So in this exercise, the idea is to think about utility depending on product characteristics and price. Okay. Better ranks cause higher probability, cause that you can observe the quantity solved, and then the idea here is to decompose the tendency to purchase into something that has to do with, an objective measure, sorry, a subjective measure of the quality of the offering, and a rank, and the effect of that. Okay, so that's the model. The idea is I will be able to rank objects, okay, and the propensity to purchase is going to depend on some measure which we call delta J0 of how good that offering is, plus some effect of rank. Okay, so the effect of rank is going to be stronger for the items higher up. Okay, that. On the supply side, the idea is, at least for the moment, let's assume that you really want to maximize. So you're going to rank those objects according to that. You're going to say that this referencing is there if you're not doing that. If you're not doing. All right. Once you introduce sellers, you get to this frontier here, which is what I was talking about. Okay. And right, so then you have this kind of two extremes. So over here, you're going to have the ranking that maximizes consumer surplus. Okay, the one that is going to rank those listings according to those inutilities or delta J0. Then on the other one here, something that is proportional to price. So here the idea is taking a stand here on what it means to maximize seller surplus. I'm saying I'm choosing the ranking that generates the highest revenue, the highest expected revenues for this particular query. So something that takes into account the product of the price at which it will be sold, times the probability that it will be sold, right? And so you're going to rank according to the expected revenue. Does that make sense? So not necessarily according to price. You can have yesterday I was looking at these hotels. There were hotels that more than €1,000, but I guess it doesn't make sense to put them at the top of the list because the probability that anyone buys those is very low, right? You would want at the top of the list something that maximizes the opportunity and probability, right? And so here I'm going to take that stance that on the opposite end of the spectrum, the ranking that does that maximizes the surplus. Now, if I do that, then I'm basically going to put an index here, right? Which is kind of trading off consumer surplus and producer surplus. So you can show that you're maximizing producer surplus when P1 is equal to P2, okay? And you're maximizing consumer surplus when P1 is equal to 0. So again, assuming that I observe utility, okay, assuming that I observe price and quantities, then this guy here is the index that I will then use. We call it an imputed rating that I will then use to rank those objects. Right? So what I'm trying to say here is that Expedia is going to choose where to be here, which is equivalent to choosing these parameters, K1 and 2. What I said. I'm saying that Expedia is going to choose K1 and 2. And then, the goal here use some data to estimate those parameters, what they actually, that makes sense. Okay. Now, no, all of that is without self-reference, right? Now, suppose that on top of that, Expedia, for some reason, prefers some J options more than others. Okay. What that means is that it's going to give an extra score to a subset of those options, right? That is going to be J is a dummy that's just one. And whenever that particular option is linked to Expedia, right? And psi is how strong the value. Again, what I'm trying to say is that in theory, here, if I have enough data, I can try to understand take one case one side and measure the extent of that. Not only that, if I add these extra parameters, I'm moving away from here, right? So you can think about measuring distance as being a measure of the efficiency cost, right? That you cause because you engage self-reference. You can think about quantifying the damage that you cause because you engage, right? Which is very important about that policy. Okay. So it's very important that this extra depth is separate from delta J. So these are reasons. Prefer some particular options which are orthogonal to the quality of the option. Okay, so if these options are better in some respects, right? So this would be captured by the delta J. These are any orthogonal reason, anything that would guide your different choices. Okay, does that make sense? So the point about this model is give us a way to think about self-referencing, also statistical sense for self-referencing, and also kind of a structural model. Now, how do you test for self-referencing? Practice. But one thing that was is kind of the obvious approach. You can regress the rank on product characteristics and platform education. Right? So basically, the idea here is being Expedia to Amazon. So the idea is to think about that Amazon is Amazon more likely to get into these ranks once you account for product characteristics. Right? Is Amazon more likely to get at the top of the page or even product characteristics? Right? So this approach is kind of the obvious one, but it works only if you observe everything, right? Which is relevant to the choice. For instance, this would kind of identify self-preferencing also takes for standard products. You could think of, maybe people like Amazon batteries, or they trust that those batteries are better than the others, or they trust that customer care of Amazon is better than Duracell, or whatever. Right? That makes sense. But if that's the case, that kind of information is not going to be your data. You're going to kind of incorrectly attribute self-referencing what is called this kind of brand-based revenue. Yes. Yeah, I guess it, yes, I would say yeah. That's kind of, yeah, that's called tying. When you're tying one service, one purchase, kind of outside of this framework, because here we're really thinking about self-referencing and being a bump up, okay, a bump up for ranking shouldn't be there. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So Amazon, yeah, I agree. But so you're thinking about a case in which these rankings they reflect and say sales, and therefore Amazon is trying to find contact uh for sales get better ranking. Okay, correct. But it simply just give itself a boost. It doesn't need, right? It doesn't need that. It doesn't give itself a boost. Okay. Right. So that's the point. My point here is that how do you measure that boost? And with this kind of obvious approach, to kind of say, because you wouldn't be able to disentangle whether those things are up there because they got an extra kick or because they're just better in the head of the consumer. If you observe an extra quality, then you can control for it. Right? So, another thing that you could do, which I know what comes out of the second side, is kind of output. Okay? Assuming you observe sales, you can posit that there is a ranking function, and then you estimate the ranking. Okay. So the idea here is that if there is no buyer, then platform and non-platform products at the same time would have the same quality and therefore the same expected sales. So the idea is very simple. Suppose that these rankings are moving around, right? If Amazon deserves to be number one, instead of being number one, it should sell as all the other number ones. That makes sense. Super simple sense. Kind of increase, right? And so we have bias ranking is, if Amazon or the own branded products are not performing as well as third-party products, conditional or down. This is one way of, visualizing these in the case of Spotify. So this, we're going back to those playlists, okay? And the idea is fixed rank, right? How do we, right? So here the conjecture is that major label songs, they get an extra kick. Think of it as, Sony going to Spotify and saying, hey, if you want to keep doing business with me, you have to, bump up my song in the top, right? And then if, Spotify reacts to that by actually doing that, what we should observe is that, conditional on rank, say a Sony song, when it ranks number one, it has less streams than a non-Sony. And so this is exactly what they look at this kind of thing. You can observe those things. And they actually document it. They document that in this song, conditional on rank, 1, 2, 5, that's a measure of streams and rank. They perform more. Okay? So that's kind of suggesting that those rankings, Spotify is actually bumping up song price and the stable. Then you can speculate what that reason is, right? So the lower the fraction of streams that Sony gets, the lower the bargaining power that they have. Right? So the last thing that I want to do here is think about measuring that loss, literally measuring that loss due to the fact that you're giving central banks cycle. Now, you have this data. Again, you can do this. This is just an example with Amazon daily. So the idea there is to measure how much welfare consumer surplus is lost because Amazon on the daily deals, Amazon titles more often than according to how consumers value those. And so there are many data issues, concept, let me just give you a number. If you do that, actually measure that you're moving away from that frontier that I talked about. You can measure any concept, kind of either by Amazon, It's kind of a very powerful technique that allows you to actually measure just by observational data. Okay. Right. So let me talk about quality. Do you have questions so far? Okay. Right. So this is just to bring you up to date on, what have we been talking about in the quality arena. Okay. Particular emphasis on what is in custom class. Also, the kind of issue that all policymakers are facing these days, the fact that, that technologies are developing way faster than we can actually think about on them by developing policies. So clearly, what are the problems with these tools in general? So we've been talking about exploitative and manipulative behavior. Self-referencing is something, something that infuses us to make us optimal process, something that makes us say more than we should, something that violates our privacy, and so on and so forth. We've been talking about statistical discrimination and algorithmic bias, right? So those songs, those, way to homogenize um, um, religion, socioeconomic class, and so on and so forth. There is a lively debate on the impact of diversity and of echo chambers, right? You all get to hear something that they important our beliefs and problems of democracy. Talking about solutions quite a bit, so here algorithms can find ways of competition and another kind of related debate that we would think the barriers to entry. So economists are kind of in this debate because they need to think about what could possibly go wrong. That's bullet point number one. Bullet point number two is, okay, now that we know what could possibly go wrong, you tell me why that outcome occurred, and if you offer me an approach to prevent that from happening. Okay, if you provide evidence, if you provide market design, like thinking about tiny markets that would be better on about taking tiny markets that would kind of make it harder for algorithms or choices to take. Okay. So yeah. Um, Another kind of related debate has to do with, why are we kind of thinking about these things once again? The same discussion that we had about big data all over again. So why is AI any special? So what is there? And, and I would say that, it's kind of machine learning or AI on that much more subtle than the previous one. Um, the following sense. So first of all, because most of these algorithms think about reinforcement learning, they tend to optimize, right, based on some measure of success. Okay, sometimes they might end up implementing conduct without anyone consciously kind of um, realizing even what that conduct is. Okay. Suppose you have a choice by one. You're defining a ranking, you're defining the user interface. Okay, when you automatize it, so you have an algorithm which is going to choose, how big the characters for those results, how big the picture should be, what is the shade of gray that you're using in the background, and that algorithm is kind of optimizing. That algorithm is going to try to find ways it's tricking you, right, to the extent that, for instance, your goal is to increase the rate that That's going to happen, autonomously without supervision. So there is no, in the new world, there is kind of no manager in charge making develop tools that are able to tackle kind of very different ways. Like in the old days, the authorities would kind of look for evidence of conspiracy, like evidence of like kind of divide activity of on 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 the case. So that's kind of connected. AI can learn to exploit particular bias, think about algorithms trying to boost engagement, like social media, wind up, causing problems to addiction because they're scoring well in terms of engagement. Um, right, it's not even clear that I think these are uses that are more technical. So it's also the case that even though we think about these tools are being very sophisticated, another issue is that some of these can be done. We're kind of using now simple algorithms, something that maybe was informed by actual humans about marketing managers were now we're replacing that with machine. And to the extent that this machine is not work well, now we have another problem, which is maybe these are, maybe prices are high, marketplaces, not because machines are intelligent, that they figure out that high prices are a good thing, but maybe because they fail to learn to compete, which is, problematic. Okay. Right. So what do we have right now in Europe? Like, so these are kind of the three most important things that we took place in the past 4 years, right? So the first one is the Digital Markets Act. This was by the European target. There was a widespread political agreement, and now it's important, okay? On the bottom. And second is the Digital Service Act. This is more tailored towards services, which is creating what was called electronic commerce provisions. So these are kind of rules and regulations that apply to electronic commerce. This is enforced again in February 2024, and then the AI Act. It was a long decision period. Finally, was voted by the parliament, but will come into force only. So compliance required only 12 months, 24 months of the permission starting. All right. So the DMI is a set of rules for platforms that are designated gatekeepers. So it's a very special piece of legislation that attacks only a subset of those platforms, of those big tech platforms. So which are Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, TikTok, basically, and Microsoft. Is anyone from these companies here? Okay. So, these are the designated gatekeepers. The objective there is, openly to try to the stability and fairness of the market. And these are literally legal obligations outside the you cannot the digital market. Okay. In particular, like the four most important it limits the amount of data that's being used for training. Okay, so you cannot find the cross-use data. Okay, I'm not sure that one way of thinking about it, like Meta not being able to combine Instagram-based data for training purposes. It's going to mandate access of training data to competitors. We're still in the process of drafting the delegated act. Okay, so nothing of this has happened yet, but in principle, the digital market can mandate access of training data to competitors. And a very strong group. Right? It's like a as strong as it gets, right? It gives access, algos, data to the commission. Okay. Particularly in Sevilla, there is an office by the of officials which are in an algorithmic unit, but the name of it potentially can ask one of these companies access algorithm, and then no, but it outright prohibits self-referencing. Right? But again, this is what the law says. The point is, again, we don't know how to go from this. These are all nice principles. Right? I just, talked at least 30 minutes on, still don't agree on what that is. Right? So there's going to be, a lot of a lively debate on how to implement the digital market tax, right? But first step prohibited. So at the very least, if you want to identify in data, as I told you, you can trick it, but at the very least, it cannot be the case that the CEO of Netflix tries to method to marketing officers saying, hey, you should do your stuff on the top. That would be immediately a violation of these. We would all agree that that's the case, and that would be have the problem. Now, the AI Act is a different animal. AI Act, even though in the media it say that some sort of regulation on how we should pay or not pay, develop or not develop, invest or not invest kind of technology, it's really a very simple tool that talks mostly about consumer protection. The AI Act is focusing on the prevention of damage. The idea is, like any firm operating in the internal market, if you supply a product to the marketplace, you should do the homework. Right? So I bet that the company who provided us with this bottle of water has to show regulators that the plastic was safe and compliant, that the water was safe and compliant. So through rounds of approval, just introduce in marketplace product in one. At the opposite end of the spectrum, we have like pharmaceutical markets that have to go through kind of years of phases, as we call it, or rounds of testing of their pharmaceutical products. Think about vaccines, right? How long vaccines was used during COVID time, even though it was kind of obvious that vaccines would have saved many lives. Silicon Valley now, those companies, they actually manage to see the world in which they would decide for themselves what was a safe algorithm, what was not. They would just release it, right? And the latest iteration of this, we have seen LLM, right? So LLMs being released to the public after some internal testing already. There was no legal requirement in place that would force this company to anything that the product. But the AI Act is kind of filling that void and saying, if something happens, so it's really about protecting consumers, whereas the Digital Market Act is more about protecting competition. Okay, and it's kind of interesting to go through because for the first time we have a proper legal definition for a right? And it's talking about regulatory sandboxes, exploitative or manipulative AI algos, so prohibition of the practices, specific requirements for high-risk AI systems. Think about, supervised learning, radiology, right? So those would be called, high-risk AI systems. Harmonized transparent tools for monitoring and surveillance, regulatory process that is going to require companies to control the experimentation on the content. To be honest with you, my opinion on the AI is like common sense. because these are all things that we do for other industries that I think we should be also doing. But again, there is like a heated political debate now over whether this is too much, right? And over whether this is making innovation, when it is advanced to Silicon Valley and so on and so forth. On the one hand, on the other hand, the U.S. is also kind of last week by California passed that rules and regulations. Eventually kicking off that process about regulating the EU. Okay, so the DSI is the most kind of relevant for this kind of conference because it's regulating digital services as intermediaries. When I think about recommended system, special application, typically an intermediary, okay, kind of intermediate size. And this applies to a much larger array of line operators. They should be quite large and active across Europe. Okay. Right. So in terms of obligations and interesting, let me highlight only things. So the first one is this idea that identify risk, mitigate that risk. Right? So, if you think of the exercise in Westbrook, where I was trying to show you that some of collaborative bias, I would say that in some applications, you can think about, say, portfolio choice. Okay? Think about a collaborative filter which is making recommendations, favors who have to keep the portfolio stock. No, I would say that the idea that we might get suboptimal recommendations, we might end up investing their savings that's not necessarily their risk profile, something that I would call incident fault. Occasionally, that this is changing the liability standing. If something happens, now the firm liable. Okay, you give them bad recommendations. Not a problem of the user that followed those recommendations, but it's also a problem of the firm that would give those recommendations. If that the firm that was given those recommendations needed in place, measure kind of measure and really that thing. Another important group here, aside those of you who are doing research, is that the Digital Service Act it's also allowing researchers, so folks in academia, to access data and algorithms. Okay, I think that's provision number 40. So you can apply that data and to get access to those algorithms. For a better research. Okay, now there is some debate over what that means. So we're trying to figure out what is, because of course, data is sensible things for the firms. You don't want to access to anyone, but that's kind of also big. What I did decide here that unfortunately Article 40 is talking about access tackle issues related to fundamental rights. Okay, so things that are linked back to democracy, child abuse, violence, things like that. Okay, so you cannot just apply to any sort of research. Okay, the objective of that violation. Right. So it applies, if anything, because Article 2 is actually singling out the recommended system, okay, as one of the regulations. So let's kind of zoom in on what are the provisions that apply to RecSys. So these are obligations, okay, for those large firms. So first of all, you should inform consumers of the outcomes that is planning for them, and of your own data and ranking. again, they mitigate the negative impact, export back to the attention, taxes, they need to minimize algorithmic bias and discrimination, help provide a functionality to allow the way they right? So a simple way to apply this would be we can order it by our magic sauce, the recommended system, or alphabetical, right? Um, the design, not I always wonder if in this community there is any debate about this or not, but I think those delegated acts um, are there any questions? In terms of enforcement? Right. Yeah, so the liability standards are actually changed. So in antitrust and competition policy, it used to be the case that you were not liable if anything went wrong unless there was true public damage, right? So literally, you had to prove that there was either a conspiracy across firms or with managers of one firm in place of conduct. It would come. Now we are in a world in which it's true what you were saying, we're deploying these tools. And even though we design these tools, they're not really sure what these tools are doing. But the liability standards are cheap in the sense that if you can in principle prove that there's been self-referencing, that the algorithm is favoring your own content and giving content to others, then you are liable no matter what. So you know, just saying I'm not, uh, I didn't mean to, and proving also that you didn't mean to help because there is this kind of presumption that you should have at least, done some testing. So maybe one way you can get out of this that you can show them that you put in place processes within your company that would manage the risk that something is wrong, right? So it's actually going to be interesting to see these companies that are actually going to be so teams that are meant to make sure, either that this risk is actually mitigated or to mitigate the risk the regulator would complain that those risks have not been mitigated. But in any event, they have the incentives to do so. We're not in that world anymore. In terms of enforcement, I would kind of welcome a more data-driven approach. And if you look at the FTC, the Department of Justice, the European Commission, over the years, by looking at the well-being professionals that they've been hiring, they're kind of more and more shifting these evidentiary standards from something along the lines of anyone called firm A from firm B and vice versa to let's go and measure if there is any outcome. And so the kind of derivative is possible in this dimension but don't know yet. So the hope is that they're gonna, I would personally welcome a more data-driven approach, which we all agree on a definition. The data-driven definition of self-referencing, and then we use that. So here it's kind of interesting because here with the digital service act, for the moment, it is kind of delegated to firms to decide, right? And then the question is, you want to do something that works in court, anything happens, right? So there is a lot of ambiguity. But again, again, we want to see those delegated acts which are not there. So I don't know. I don't know yet. Okay. Um, so I think maybe we can spend it, call it a day, because I think at this point going back purely from the 20 to 6, it will be torture to you. So it is still keep those 20 minutes of here, and then pause those lines somewhere. So can online. And you're very welcome to those together coming now, and can chat if you want, or we're very welcome to get or anything that I should know, anything you should know, or some kind of idea about the company. Okay, but so thanks for coming and thanks for yeah. We'll have I evening body.